Manawaker Studios Flash Fiction Podcast is supported by patrons on Patreon. To find out more or to add your support for as little as $1 a month, visit patreon.com/Manawaker. Welcome to Manawaker Studios Flash Fiction Podcast. I'm CB Droege. Once a year, as a sort of holiday tradition, I like to present within the podcast one of my own stories. And so this week, I am pleased to read for you Terramancer. Phipp stared blearily out of his second-story window to see what all the noise was. Something had awoken him from a light morning doze, and now he saw that it was an aged wizard performing a ritual of some kind out on his lawn. Phipp looked at his watch. 8 a.m. It was Saturday, and he had planned to sleep in. Below, the bearded man in a pointy cap was dancing around a small fire, clanging some metal cymbals together and chanting in a low, monotonous voice. Phipp sighed and put his robe and slippers on. It was getting into spring, but it looked like a cold morning. Phipp hated confrontation. Just last week he had overpaid by $4 silver on his grocery bill because the clerk had rung up his gluten-free bread twice, and Phipp had decided it worth the $4 to not have to go back and talk to the service desk about it. And now he was standing with his hands on the knob of the side door of his house, the door that led to the most attractive part of his property, where he would have to confront a wizard trespasser. This was not how he had imagined starting his weekend. He steeled his resolve, straightened his back, and opened the door. It was as chilly as it had looked outside, and Phipp's thin slippers were not quite enough shielding as he stepped down the few concrete stairs and into the grass. "Excuse me," he called over the clanging and chanting. The wizard did not respond. He called out again, and this time the wizard glanced at him but still did not stop his performance. If anything, the fervor and volume of the noise increased. Sour and cold, Phipp watched the wizard for a few moments, waiting to see if he would be acknowledged, then called out, "I'm going to call the police now," and turned to go back into his home, thinking that calling the police should have been the first step. As Phipp opened the door, though, the clanging and chanting ceased finally. "Sorry about that, young man," a reedy voice said from across the grass. "If I'd stopped the sacramental component of the spell partway through, I'd have had to begin all over again." Phipp closed the door and turned to face the wizard, hands on hips. "So, what are you doing on my property?" The old man looked at the lawn, as if only just realizing where he was. "Oh my," he said, putting one thin-fingered hand up to the brim of his purple hat. "Is this not part of the public land?" "It is not," Phipp said. "This is my lawn, and you've burned a large hole into it." "Dreadfully sorry, friend," the wizard said. "I knew that this hill was on public land." He gestured to the grassy mound of earth behind him, just beyond the boundary of Phipp's property. "But didn't think to check this spot here. I chose it because there's very little brush here for the fire to spread to." "Well, I keep it mown." "Of course you do. That should have tipped me off that it wasn't part of the park," the old man said, frowning. "I should have cleared a spot on the other side of the hill, or at least asked your permission." The wizard looked pitifully sad and genuinely contrite, and Phipp's resolve drained out of him, and he sighed. "How much longer will you be?" he asked. The old man's face brightened. "Not long now. Just need to add a few more reagents to the flames, and it's done." "Mind if I watch, then?" "Not a bit," the wizard beamed. "It's your yard, after all." Phipp sat down on the concrete stairs, letting the cold of them seep through his robe. The rising sun had come out from behind some clouds, and the contrast on his skin was pleasant. "I don't think I've ever seen a spell quite like this one," he said conversationally. "It's my own adaptation of a standard shift spell." "That's a big fire for a shift spell," Phipp noted. He didn't know a lot about magic, but he'd seen some videos on YouTube and knew what a typical shift spell looked like. It was usually accomplished with a match or lighter, and just a few chanted words. The wizard chuckled. "It has to be," he said, gesturing to the grassy mound. What? You're going to shift the hill? Oh, yes. Whatever for? Isn't it a beautiful hill? He stopped digging in his backpack for a moment to look over at the knoll. Phipp squinted. He had never considered the hill itself. He enjoyed the view from this side of his house, but usually considered it in aggregate, not as specific components. Even trying now, he had a hard time judging the hill for its own merits. I guess it's a pretty nice hill, he said lamely. It makes the whole park shine. The wizard returned to his backpack and drew out a few smaller bags that looked like they were filled with different herbs and colorful beads. It's probably among the top 3 most beautiful hills in the country, and certainly the loveliest on public land. I suppose, was all Phipp could bring himself to say. He watched for a moment as the wizard placed a portion of the contents of each of the bags into a mortar and began grinding them together. Why shift it then? Oh! The wizard gave a soft chuckle. It's just not in quite the right spot. How far will you shift it? Phipp asked, tilting his head to one side, trying to imagine the hill moved a bit to one side or the other. All the way home, the old man said, and dumped the contents of the mortar onto the fire. There was a sound like a smack, then a rush of air. The hill, the fire, the wizard, and all the wizard's belongings were gone. Where they had been was now only a bare expanse of flat rock. After an initial moment of silent shock, Phipp thought that the wizard had been right. It really had been the hill that made the view special. This has been Terramancer, written by CB Droege. The Flash Fiction Podcast theme song is by Kevin MacLeod. Manawaker Studios' director of DICE is Ben Baston. I'm CB Droege. You can follow me on Twitter and Facebook at CBDroege. Thus ends Season 3 of our podcast. Manawaker Studios' Flash Fiction Podcast will be back in February with new installments. Until then, enjoy your holidays and have a Happy New Year. Thanks for listening.